Now, a blow for households. From the 1st of April 2025, the quarterly energy price cap will increase by 6.4% to £1,849 per year.
How did they get away with it? 6.4%? You couldn't get a pay rise of 6.4%. No. Well, for a typical household, that will add £9.25 a month to your energy bill.
An average of £111 per year. Well, this morning, the government are pointing the finger at the rising prices on the use of fossil fuels.
The only way we can have the energy security that British people deserve is by getting off fossil fuels that are controlled by petrostates and dictators.
And in the meantime, you'll go broke. Analysis for GBNews shows the biggest culprit is the explosion in subsidies for renewable energy and net zero policies.
Well, in response to this increase, nearly 3 million households in the UK will now be eligible for the £150 warm home discount next winter, bringing the total number of recipient homes to an estimated 6.1 million.
Look, so here's my point. Why give out rebates when they just shouldn't allow the increase in the first place? You know,
or don't scrap winter fuel allowance for pensioners.
Yeah. Adam Cherry, our reporter, with more on this. Adam, good morning to you.
Good morning. Yeah, it's striking when you read those figures out, isn't it? I'll just bring you a couple more to give some context to this, to give an idea of how badly this has gone so quickly, actually. So let's hear from the analysis provided by Warm this winter. And actually, it's even worse than this because they were basing this analysis on a 5% increase. The reality is a 6.4%. Even so, the organisation says that the average household would have been likely to pay around £750 more this year for energy compared to winter 2020-2021, which is a 75% increase. Just unbelievable, £750 more. And then if you look at just electricity prices in the last decade alone, since 2015 it's jumped from £664 per year for the average household to £994. On top of that, of course, you've got your council tax this year going up, your water bill going up. And the question is, as you said throughout the programme, is this being fuelled by net zero policies and the subsidies that customers are having to pay on top of their bills? So just continue with that analysis. As you mentioned, Professor Gordon Hughes, who has provided some analysis for GBNews from the University of Edinburgh, says the biggest culprit here is the explosion of subsidies for renewable energy and net zero policies, and actually it's representing about £223 per person, per household. Now we have heard, as you just played, the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, who during the election campaign vowed that the Labour government would get energy prices down per customer for about 300 quid. Doesn't look like that's happening. Of course, as you'd expect, the opposition parties are jumping all over that figure. So we heard from Andrew Bowie MP today, who is the shadow acting energy secretary. He said the latest hike in the price cap is a betrayal to the families who Ed Miliband promised to save £300 on their bills. Labour's election promise is shot and bills are on the rise. I'm here in Cornwall. I'm going to be talking to local people about how they feel about that, how they feel seeing their bills rise, and frankly, can they afford it?
That's the question, Adam. Thanks very much indeed for the update. We're going to get reaction now from the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Listening to that, Richard Tice. Richard, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Yeah, although there's nothing much good about it when you see these prices, you hear these prices, and you try and think, what's this achieving, and when will it achieve it? It's not even so much that we've got to pay more. It's that we've got to pay more on top of everything else, and this won't be the last thing, and it just goes on and on and on, and it's as if nobody in government ever looks at people and think, how much can they take?
It's far worse than that. I'm afraid that you've just played a clip of the Energy Secretary misleading the British people, blaming the increase in the price of gas. Let me just tell your listeners and viewers, the price of gas has fallen by 10% since the beginning of January. The price of gas is exactly where it was last November. So these price increases of 6.4% since January is totally due to the renewable subsidies. They're up 18% since last July, and the British people have been sold a complete and utter pup by this government. All of this is on net stupid zero. We're calling it out. If there was no net zero, there would be none of these price increases, and bills would come down significantly. That is the cost, the damage to the British people of net zero. Our bills are up, our cost of living is up, jobs are being put at risk at places like Cowley, they're gone at Luton, the car industry. All of this is because of net zero, and the government is deeply, deeply misleading the British people.
So Reform's plan for energy is to scrap net zero. I've got it here in front of me, Reform UK's plan. So windfall tax on renewable generated power, solar farm tax on farmers that are taking the renewable subsidy, a ban on battery energy storage systems, and legislate to force National Grid to put cables underground, right? So this is a bold plan, but many would say this isn't free market, which is what you're supposed to stand for.
Again, that's an assumption. The point is that government is there to try and make life better for people and for markets to work. We haven't got a free market at the moment because of all the subsidies. So what our policies do is, in a sense, offset these vast subsidies because of net zero and put the money back into people's pockets, not into the developers and the promoters of all these renewables. The vested interests in the renewables industry are making fortunes at the cost of the British people. So we're going to reverse that. That's our plan. We're going to protect the British countryside by protecting them from the blight of hundreds or thousands of huge, ugly pylons, as well as protect people from the dangers of the very expensive battery storage systems, one of which, even since I announced that policy some 10 days ago, a new battery storage system, not yet operational, has just gone up in flames in Essex, in the constituency of my colleague James McMurdoch. These things are dangerous.
Richard, I'm just looking at viewer comments coming through, and it's heartbreaking. It really is, what people are having to choose between, and people are very depressed by all of this. But basically they're saying, I mean, here's a quote. Ed Miliband has said, Richard says, fuel bills are going through the roof. Well, there's a surprise. Miliband must have known this would happen by pursuing this deranged net zero policy. However, the Labour elitists don't care, says Richard. I'm sure you'd very much agree with that. But here's my point. If planet warming, if climate control is an issue, well, you know, let's just accept it's an issue. What on earth do you do? How can you address both? How can you care for the planet, and how can you reduce fuel bills? What's the answer?
It's really, actually, I mean, it's really quite simple. You know, the climate's changed for millions of years. It always will. What you do is you adapt to it. Two or 3,000 years ago, it was 1.5 degrees warmer in the UK than it is now. Human beings adapt. That'd be much, much cheaper than thinking you can stop the power of the sun or stop the power of volcanoes. You can't. If we get rid of all of net zero, the bills will come down, the cost of living will come down. That's the critical thing to help people feel better off in their pocket at the end of each week. It's really not very difficult. And this crisis was caused by the Tories imposing net zero on us and has been accentuated by Labour. And I'm delighted that Reform UK were calling it out. And it's funny, isn't it? We seem to be top of the polls. Maybe people are listening to us.
Richard, can I ask you about something entirely different, and that is Mike Amesbury, the MP for Runcorn and Helsby. You will know he's been jailed for 10 weeks now for assaulting a constituent. He hasn't resigned, so he will continue to receive his £91,000 salary. But there will presumably be a recall petition in these weeks and months to come. Do you fancy your chances in his seat, Reform UK?
Well, we'll certainly be going for it big time and working very, very hard. We won't take anything for granted. Nothing's easy, and indeed, nor should it be, of course. But we will go for it as soon as the by-election is announced. Doesn't it tell you something about Labour politicians? That here's a man who punched and thumped one of his constituents, has been sent to jail, but he doesn't have the moral decency or integrity to resign and accept that he can't be paid by the taxpayer. I mean, honestly, in no private sector business would that be allowed to continue. Oh, but if you're a Labour politician, just keep taking the shilling from the taxpayer, even when you're in jail. I think that tells us a lot about the complete collapse in integrity amongst socialists.
Richard Tice, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Richard Tice from Reform UK.
Well, let us know what you think on any of those issues that we were discussing with Richard. gbnews.com/yoursay.